suppose, like taking stock, which we've kind of only really had the chance to do post Christmas. It's been really interesting to look back on why we made the approach that we did, or why we did the approach that we did. I think interestingly, we still are coming to a completion of a strategic planning to develop a new strategic plan for the organization. So back in January, February last year, we were looking at kind of what we are, what we do, how we do it, how can we, do more. But the big thing for us when we had on the day that on the day the schools closed, where the restrictions started to come in, we had delegates from Scotland, Sweden, and Belgium in our theatre, who had just arrived that morning, and they were due to be here for 3 days as part of a climate and the arts seminar. So we spent most of that day booking flights home for them. So literally, I gathered all the team together, and we just decided that we knew what was coming, but that as a building, we were going to have to close. But as an organization, we certainly weren't. So I suppose once we made that decision, then we looked at what we wanted to do, not what we could do, because I think that came later. I think what we wanted to do as an organization. So again, we kind of went back to what we normally do. And what we're here to do is to, engage in our communities, be they our local community, be they the artists that we work with, our stakeholders. We wanted to make and support the development of work, and we wanted to make and support and create a space for people to engage with their and others' creativity. So starting from there, we went, okay, it's not so much what we can't do. We all know that. And that was the big kind of cloud to keep out of the room. It's like, because so much conversations had been about what can't we do? We're kind of going, okay, we know we can't do any of that, but what is it possible to do? Then our abilities came into play. So where are our main resources? And the main resources in the arts and in society and in communities are people. So we looked to our staff, we talked to our staff, and even though, in normal times, whereas there are roles in the organization, we would have a very blended development structure here, where everyone as much as possible is involved in decision making and the way it. So we discovered that we all now were in the wider role of programming and de facto marketing, whether that's institutional marketing or programmatic marketing. So at the very beginning, then we kind of went, okay, what do we need to kind of skill up on? We had just at that juncture moved ticketing company to Ticketsolve. And that turned out to be an amazing boon for us through the first year, because our ticketing system became something very different than just selling shows. It became a portal for what we kind of have now christened internally our kind of virtual theaters or virtual spaces. And then we kind of went, okay, but a huge part of it is in relation to our engagement with our communities. How are we going to do that when at certain levels we can't have people in the building, or we can have a number of smaller groups in the building, but it's not going to be the same way. So obviously there was a period of mourning and kind of going, oh God, it's awful, and what are we going to do? But then we started looking at what we normally do. And a huge part of our program, as I said, is around arts development, is around conversation, is around kind of bringing people together, is around kind of having those, developing work, developing community projects. So we decided to flip that and kind of go, well, what actually if we do those not do them all in the public domain, but carry them out in the public domain and let people know what we do, and therefore engage more people in that, and also create public engagement for things that would never have had public engagement before. And also, what has been the big kind of learning for us during this is to invite the public into spaces that never existed for them before. So invite them into spaces that weren't there, or one would have never thought about during, open times. So I suppose once we made that decision, and also I had a kind of joke when I started here, obviously it was the kind of, you're taking over an organization. One of my big mantras was, God, I wish I was here when the building was open. I was kind of going, well, now I'm kind of going, well, like probably next summer or in the autumn, we're have an opportunity to reopen the building. So again, to the staff and to anyone that would listen to us, we're saying we're never going to have this opportunity again, both as an organization, but also as a sector, to really engage with what we do and how we can communicate, and more importantly, why we're communicating. So also then with artists, and this was supposed great from the Arts Council, they kind of front-ended all our funding, so we could spend it in very different ways. So we decided to go along the route of bursaries and residencies and get them out very, very early to get to get money to artists, but money to artists to pay them to engage with us and their work, rather than just in a kind of transactional, there's a bit of cash for you. And I suppose through that, we had a staff member leave around the same time to go on to another job. And rather than replace that role, we came up with the idea of doing these pop-up departments to do these kind of experiments over a year. So there'd be no, if it didn't work, fine. If it did work, great. So we developed a kind of pop-up literary department because we couldn't cope with the amount of artists that we wanted to deal with. So an artist came up with the idea, came to us, she got a bursary and is now kind of heading into her second year with us. And through that, guys, and through our other guys, we supported monetarily, resource-wise and developmentally wise over 80 artists in the last year. So I suppose for me, it wasn't just about producing work, because that's not wholly what we do. We do produce plays, and we have done. Like, it startled me at the end of the year when we looked at our figures that we produced 140 hours of content in 2020 from March to December. Now that ranged from 10 plays that we recorded and broadcasted online, a live stream, but it also was, we developed this thing called the Access Chats, where again, it was kind of about people. And I was very interested in the public being able to engage with artists and people in the arts sector in a non-transactional way, in a space where they're not coming on to a chat show to sell their kind of latest film. They're coming on to talk about their lives. I started that last March. Little did I think that I'm about to do my 93rd interview next week. But they kind of garnered for Access a huge network of connections. It started off with people that I knew, but now it's kind of grown into people that want to do it, or people that have been kind of suggested to me. So from an institutional marketing point of view and networking point of view, that's been an incredible kind of boon. Our music was a big part of our first iteration. We started these things called the Access Sessions, which again, and there's an awful lot of conversation in the first session about technology and you know, the trick around that and the expense of that and the kind of, I suppose, the learning around that. But for us, what was key at the beginning, it was that, you know, the digital aspect of work in this pandemic is actually a mechanism rather than what you're doing. So when you integrate with the digital aspect of it, if you have agreed based upon your own value system of what you want to do, then that's just a learning mechanism to get that across. So we kind of very much at the early point of view, we hadn't got the gear. We had, you know, said, okay, we're not going to wait 6 months to do something. So I saw that some pubs were doing streamed gigs from people's houses. So I contacted a few artists, and it was amazing. It kind of got me through the early part of it. From April, May, June, and July, we had a singer-songwriter from their home every week or 10 days, and they played a set on Facebook Live, and it was free, and it was donations if you want. But in the same way that Anne Clark was talking about the amazing kind of live piece, what was amazing was looking at the chats on that, and you had people from Canada and people from, you know, all over the world logging in, and also acts who weren't at a level where they would get more than 50 people in our theatre were having an engagement of like over a week, 500 or 600. Now it was like 3,500, you know, views, but actually when you dig down into it, there's 500 people kind of watched it. That's extraordinary numbers for like two young singer-songwriters starting out from East Wall. And that was done very easily. That wasn't a big, you know, there wasn't a 4 months thinking process behind that. It was like, sort of, what are we going to do? So I suppose the impression might have been that this was all very slapdash. It actually wasn't. It was kind of very much thought out in relation to what we were trying to build. So it went from an initial Access Online program, then around Crinnion and Know, we kind of went, look, we really need to kind of connect back into our communities. So we linked in with the schools and we gave them art packs, and then we delivered 200 art packs to the local houses, and had singer-songwriters going out and standing at people's gardens and performing. So there was all these, and that was an idea that one of our staff came up with, and we said, yes, so a lot of my job over the last year has been kind of saying yes. And also in relation to the role of an art centre is, and the role of a cultural centre is, like in relation to artists, and an awful lot of time was us kind of getting out of the way. So like an awful lot of the great stuff that came in here last year was an artist coming in with an idea. We're going, actually, yeah, we can do that. figuring out what the contract is and just doing it. So I think that piece that Neil talked about that yesterday, the amazing thing about turning, I found it totally invigorating that you can turn an idea around in a day, or you can turn an idea around in a month, which is very difficult before. Sorry, Heather.
Mark, this experimenting thing is just amazing. To be able to say yes like that is extraordinary. But did you have an idea of what success would look like? I mean, did you have an idea of what you wanted to achieve, or was it just more important to experiment?
No, I think it was about not developing experiments into a vacuum. So it was very much about where the engagement was, and that was very much agreed across each of the projects. So obviously, if you're doing Facebook Live events and no one's watching them, you're not going to, you can't afford to keep paying people, and you can't afford to keep giving the resources in for staff to kind of run that. In relation to the Access chats, if people didn't want to be on them and if people didn't want to watch them, then we'd stop doing that. So I suppose it's kind of nearly flipping the success paradigm. It's exploring the failure of it. So if it doesn't fail, then you keep going and it'll grow. But it's also things that fitted in with what we already do. Like, for example, we have a history of kind of working with artists and new writing. So not all, and previously one of the big things we were hamstrung on is not all those shows would ever get to public engagement because they weren't ready, or we hadn't got the resources to develop things to a full production. But it's been amazing in the few that we've done, like rehearsed readings and recorded rehearsed readings and shot beautifully rehearsed readings that have got massive for rehearsed reading, massive audience reach that they would never have got. And again, that allows the audience into something that they wouldn't have seen before. And also the tech behind that was, I mean, we can't afford, I mean, we applied and got the Arts Council capacity development grant, but the cameras that we're using aren't your TV kind of cameras. They're very, very good Sony, camera cameras that can record video. Because we again agree, we're not going to be in competition with Netflix and BBC. So yes, it's important that the quality of the sound actually more so, and the quality of the video is up to a certain amount. But audiences really dug into the fact that this was kind of a bit, anarchic is the wrong word, but a bit, and that's why we call it Access Bootleg, a bit kind of, a bit anarchic and a bit you don't know what's going to happen. So like we had a series of 10 conversations over Zoom with Lorraine Marr, who's an artist based in originally contemporary based in London, who spoke to a range of people about identity in the arts. And she interviewed people from Emma DeBarry to Maureen Kennelly to Dylan Coburn. So, and again, those conversations were live. I wasn't sitting there. There's a big, huge part of me letting go because we were giving the Access platform to other people. So for example, a guy with the guitarist from a brilliant band called the Lazarus Soul got on to me and said, had we any advice, he wanted to release this live concert that he had filmed himself doing in this cathedral in Nice. And I went, well, sure, we'll do it for you. And he went, really? I went, yeah, absolutely. So we gave him, we bought the license off him and we distributed it for him. We're in talks this year with kind of other acts that are kind of doing that and even the way Dublin Port, the Pump House series came to us, where it was 3 brilliantly new film plays that we had been involved in certain ways with before, and certainly had a huge relationship with the writers. It was the artists and Dublin Port that came to us asking us to executively produce that, because we had the wherewithal in relation to, they were originally discussing just putting them out onto YouTube, and we went, no, you have to make them events. So all those things that you would normally do as a venue that had a ticketing system became a massive resource for us here. Mentioned, Rob was talking about social media. That became really interesting to us. And I think, Facebook would be our huge, not necessarily selling, but community engagement, say with our local kind of North Dublin community. And things that get real traction and have done for years for us is not necessarily our events, but about people in the area, or, being a community notice board. So we went, okay, our presence on social media has to be the way we have our presence in real life. We have an open door policy. We have very strict policies in relation to the organization, that we respond to emails as soon as we can. We don't leave people hanging for months. We kind of, if we say we can't. And so I think and this took an awful lot of time, both personally and for the organization, but we had to take it as a fun way, is that we were very responsive on social media. So Access felt like a living organism rather than a venue. I struggle with that word venue in the best of times. I really struggle with it during this time. And even like Access is not just a theater. So it's kind of it's a resource. So I became very interested in what that resource means. So even like yesterday morning, we were doing a workshop on climate adaptation with a range of Leaving Cert students from the different schools. So what we've done with that is that will be broadcast for other schools, not to the public, but other schools will get that as a resource in relation to their schoolwork. We also have developed like conversations around Leaving Cert online on Zoom, but they're very easy. I mean, that's just Zoom. That's just us paying a few people to talk about things, but they've got really, really interesting engagements. The whole area of conversation has become fascinating to me. Sorry, I feel like I'm wathering on here.
Mark, can you say a little bit more about what the difference is between an event and just putting something on YouTube? How are you defining an event?
An event is when it goes onto our ticket solve, and you can look at it. So when you go to book, when you go to book for Bang Bang at Christmas and you go through ticket solve, you will also see a full page on the ticket solve homepage of like, a chat with Roxanne and Nick Liam and two young students about women in poetry. You'll have Lorraine Mars, so they're all there. And again, that kind of turns out where it's Access. We don't have, we kind of have long time ago banned word outreach from our organization. It's all one. Do you know what I mean? So we see all those things as different manifestations of what we do rather than a hierarchy of program. So I think that's kind of been to our benefit through this. So we're engaging, at similar times with local people in the area around, like it's our 20th anniversary this year, but also in 2001, Bloody Sunday, the film was shot in Ballymun. So we're developing a podcast around that. So on one level, we're talking on Facebook to people about kind of sending in their data, or sorry, their input into that, while we're also developing a new play for presentation at the end of March.
Now, the one big thing that you'd say to other art centres, venues, whatever we want to call them, about how they might look at the coming months, what would be the one big thing that you would say to them, that your big message?
I think it's literally, don't feel pressurized into doing something that you can't do or that you don't want to do. Because if you don't want to do it, it's not going to work. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's things that I don't want to do here. So either I'll get someone else to do. You know what I mean? There's things that I don't want to do. There's things that we can't do. Like, we can't do what Landmark brilliantly have done. So I'm kind of going, we can't do that. The business model is not there for us. But we can partner with people and use your platform. I think you don't know what you have, because we have facilitated rakes of artists, rakes of production, of small production companies. Like, we got a whole new writing festival by a conversation from the Core Ensemble, and they went up on Zoom live every Tuesday night. But that was very little work from us. We had to do a bit of tech around, getting them live, but that was theirs, and they were paid. We supported them in doing that. So I think it can get very tricky about kind of the workload coming in and kind of submerging you. The workload is actually being able to step back, and we very much, it's been alert online. It's been alert to what people are looking at, being alert to trends. It takes time. It really does take time. But it's no different to in a normal open world where your role, I believe, as an artistic director or as a producer or as whatever it is to listen. And I think that's the major thing. And so just one thing which is very important for us right at the beginning, and an awful lot of artists and the public have responded to us, is when we decided we weren't closed, we also said we're here. And that's a really interesting thing to say, you're here, both as a person in your role, as different people in the organization, or as the organization, that you can contact us and we will get back to you. And it's at the very initial point of this, there was so much fear in the arts sector. There was so much fear from everybody that yes, artists required the financial funding and resourcing, but also it just requires someone that they can pick up a phone to and have a chat. And that might sound very, airy fairy, but it absolutely was fundamental. And that would also be in relation to someone from the community who used to come in here and have the tea with their daughter or whatever, that they can't do that now. It's reaching out to them, and there's always a phone. Do you know what I mean? So I would say don't be scared of digital. The digital is only one way of doing things. And I agree with the speakers yesterday. It's a really all-encompassing world. I don't believe there is an online audience. I think there are people who use online, and I think there's been a major opportunity to engage with people who have never engaged with access or theatre or whatever, and don't even know what that means. But I think the opportunity in this time to develop an understanding of theatre, to actually, it's like a trailer. I'm viewing this as a trailer for live theatre.